Before I tell you this story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever driven through Monument Valley at night? I don't mean during the day when the tour buses roll through and the mittens catch the sunset light like something out of a postcard. I mean at night when Highway 163 cuts through the darkness and those formations rise around you like sleeping giants, when your headlights only reach so far and the desert beyond is absolute black. If you have, leave a comment and tell me if you felt it. That sensation that something ancient is watching from between those rocks. Something that was here long before the highway, before the visitor center, before humans gave those formations names. And if this is your first time hearing about what really happens out here in Monument Valley, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another ghost story. This is about coming home to a place that remembers your bloodline and the price my family paid for forgetting the rules that keep the ancient things away. My name is Sarah Nez, and 3 months ago, I made a decision that changed everything. I left a comfortable position with Denver Police Department, 8 years of building a career in a city where police work made sense, where crimes had rational explanations and evidence followed logical patterns. I came back to the Navajo Nation, to Monument Valley, to join the tribal police in the most remote district in our territory. The drive from Denver to Monument Valley takes about 7 hours if you don't stop. I stopped 4 times, not because I needed to, but because every mile south took me closer to the place where my sister died, closer to family I hadn't seen in those 8 years, closer to questions that had been eating at me since I got the phone call at 2:47 in the morning 3 months ago. Emily's dead. Single vehicle accident on Highway 163. That was all they told me at first. My younger sister, 26 years old, careful driver, born and raised on these roads, dead on a straight stretch of highway in good weather, with no explanation except appeared to swerve to avoid something. No other vehicles involved. No witnesses. Just Emily's truck rolled 3 times and coming to rest upside down with her still strapped in the driver's seat, eyes open, staring at something that wasn't there anymore. The landscape changed as I drove south. Urban sprawl gave way to high plains, then to the red rock country that defines this part of the Navajo Nation. By the time I crossed into the Monument Valley Tribal Park area, the earth had turned the color of rust and dried blood, and the formations I'd grown up with rose from the desert floor like ancient sentinels. The Mittens, Merrick Butte, Sentinel Mesa, all the formations tourists photograph without understanding what they're really looking at. Sacred places, old places, places where the boundary between worlds has always been thin. I pulled into the Monument Valley Police Department at 7:30 in the morning, 15 minutes early for my first shift. The station was a low modern building of tan brick and tinted windows, built to withstand the desert sun and the sandstorms that blow through the valley 3 or 4 times a year. 2 patrol vehicles sat in the small parking lot, both Ford Explorers with Navajo Nation police markings, both coated in the fine red dust that covers everything out here. A flagpole flew 3 flags, American, Navajo Nation, and Utah, because Monument Valley straddles the state line, and we operate under a jurisdictional agreement that makes federal agents nervous and state police confused. Captain Raymond Sozi stood by one of the patrol vehicles, checking equipment with the methodical care of someone who'd been doing this job for decades. He was maybe 60 years old with steel gray hair cut military short and the kind of weathered face that comes from 30 years working in high desert sun and wind. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, his badge polished, his presence radiating an authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with earned respect. He looked up as I got out of my truck, and his expression was carefully neutral. Officer Nez, you made good time from Denver. Yes, sir. Sarah Nez reporting for duty. His handshake was firm, his eyes calculating as he studied me. Denver PD for 8 years. Good record, solid performance reviews, commendations for work in gang crimes unit. Then your sister dies, and you put in for transfer to tribal police, taking a pay cut to work in one of the most remote, understaffed districts in the Navajo Nation. He tilted his head slightly. Why? I'd prepared an answer for this question. Something professional about wanting to serve my people, about feeling called to come home, about honoring Emily's memory. All of it true, but none of it the real reason. My sister died on Highway 163 3 months ago, I said instead. Single vehicle accident, the report said. Swerved to avoid something in the road. But the investigating officer's report listed the obstacle as animal species unknown. I want to know what killed Emily, and I want to make sure it doesn't kill anyone else. Captain Sosie's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained hard. Emily was a good officer, smart, dedicated, careful. She worked with us for 2 years before the accident. He paused. The investigation is closed, Officer Nez. Accidental death. No evidence of foul play. No witnesses. No other vehicles involved. Sometimes people swerve for animals we can't identify in the dark. Coyotes, deer, even cattle get loose out here. The report said her eyes were open when they found her. I met his gaze. The EMTs said it looked like she died afraid of something. Yes. He gestured toward the station. Come inside. We need to talk before your shift starts. The interior of the station was functional and sparse. A bullpen with 6 desks, only 3 of them currently occupied. A break room with a coffee maker that looked like it had survived since the 90s. Captain Tasosi's office with windows overlooking Highway 163 as it cut through the valley. A holding cell that looked rarely used. And on the wall near the main entrance, a framed document that immediately caught my attention. It was old, the paper yellowed with age, the text handwritten in careful block letters that had been photocopied and reframed multiple times over the years. The frame itself looked expensive, like someone had spent money ensuring this document would survive. The title read, Monument Valley Tribal Police Protocols, established 1971. Below that, 7 rules written in both English and Navajo. Rule 1. Never speak the word Yinallushi aloud, especially after dark. Refer to them as the witch or it if you must speak of them at all. Speaking the name draws their attention. Rule 2. If someone knocks on your door at night and calls your name, verify who they are through a window before opening. Do not trust the voice alone. They can mimic anyone, even family members who are still alive. Rule 3. Do not whistle at night while on patrol or at home. Whistling calls things to you. If you hear whistling from multiple directions simultaneously, return to your vehicle immediately and leave the area. Rule 4. If someone knocks 3 times on your door or vehicle and then stops, do not open the door. Do not look outside. Wait 15 minutes in silence. If they meant you no harm, they will knock again differently. Rule 5. Highway 163 between the Mittens and Mexican Hat is particularly dangerous during new moon phases. Minimize patrols during these periods. Never patrol this section alone after 10 p.m. on new moon nights. Rule 6. If you see an animal whose eyes reflect light in the wrong color, or reflect when they shouldn't, do not approach. Note the location and report immediately to command. Do not pursue. Do not investigate alone. Rule 7. If you hear singing or chanting coming from between rock formations at night, do not investigate the source. Mark the location and contact a Hatali immediately. Some ceremonies should not be witnessed by those not trained to understand them. Below the rules, a final note in different handwriting, added later. These protocols were written in blood and learned through loss. They are not suggestions. They are not cultural sensitivity guidelines. They are survival instructions. Officers who ignore them have died. Officers who follow them have lived. Choose wisdom. It was signed by Captain Raymond Sosi and dated 2003. I read through the list twice, then looked at Captain Sosi, who had entered his office and was watching me. Is this serious? Does it look like a joke? He sat behind his desk and gestured for me to take the chair across from him. I know what they taught you in Denver. Pursue all leads. Investigate all reports. Follow evidence wherever it takes you. Trust your training and your backup. Those are good rules for Denver. Out here, those rules will get you killed. Captain, with all due respect, these read like traditional beliefs. Folklore. We're law enforcement officers, not what? His voice was quiet, but hard. Not Navajo? Not people who grew up hearing these stories and understanding why they exist? Not people who should be enforcing superstition as official policy. Captain Sosi leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. Your sister Emily. Did she tell you about her last month working here? My throat tightened. She stopped calling me the last 6 weeks before she died. I thought she was just busy with work. She was terrified. He pulled a file from his desk drawer, old and worn, Emily's name written on the tab in her own handwriting. She came to me 4 times asking to be reassigned to Window Rock or Shiprock, anywhere but Monument Valley District. I told her the same thing I'm telling you. This isn't about belief or superstition. This is about survival in a place where things exist that don't fit into modern law enforcement training. He slid the file across the desk. Inside were incident reports in Emily's careful handwriting, dated from 6 months ago to 3 weeks before her death. As I read, my hands started to shake. Responded to call about prowlers near East Mitten Butte at approximately 22:15 hours. Complainant reported seeing figures moving between the formations after dark. Approached on foot with flashlight and radio. Observed movement approximately 70 yards from East Mitten. Called out identification as NNPD officer. Figure stood up from crouched position. Initially appeared human, but movement was wrong. Walked using both hands and feet, but maintained upright posture. Pursued for approximately 40 seconds, before it transitioned to moving on all 4 limbs. Appeared to be same entity, but now clearly animal-like in motion. Ended pursuit per Protocol 6 and returned to vehicle. Upon return, found scratch marks on driver's side door at 3 different heights. Highest mark approximately 7 feet from ground. Jesus, I whispered. That was her first major incident. Captain Sosi tapped the file. She had 3 more over the next 4 months, each one worse. The last one, 2 weeks before she died, she came back from a night patrol and sat in this office for 3 hours. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't go home. Just sat there shaking and drinking coffee until sunrise. When I finally got her to tell me what happened, she said she'd been driving Highway 163 near Sentinel Mesa when something crossed the road in front of her. Something tall and pale that moved wrong, with too many joints. She stopped her vehicle, protocol violation, and it turned to look at her. She said its eyes reflected red like a coyote's, but the shape was wrong. The face was almost human. It smiled at her. Then it was gone, just vanished between one blink and the next. The office felt colder. You think something killed her, not an accident. I think Emily encountered something that modern police training says shouldn't exist. and I think whatever it was got tired of her seeing it. He closed the file. The investigating officer found tracks near her skid marks, coyote prints, but too large, spaced too far apart, and mixed with barefoot human prints that appeared and disappeared randomly. The medical examiner said Emily died from injuries sustained in the rollover, but she also noted that Emily's expression, the way her eyes were fixed, suggested she saw something that terrified her in those last moments. Before I could respond, a knock sounded on the office door. "Come in," Captain Sosi called. A young officer entered, maybe 24 or 25 years old, with the build of someone who'd grown up doing ranch work and the careful manner of someone still learning the job. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished despite the dust outside, his name tag reading J. Benelli. "Sarah, this is Officer James Benelli. He'll be your partner while you get oriented to the district." Captain Sosi stood. "James, this is Officer Sarah Nez. Show her the ropes, introduce her to the patrol routes, and brief her on current cases." After Captain Sosi left, James shook my hand. His grip was firm, his smile friendly but cautious. "Heard you worked Denver PD. That's pretty different from here." Seemed like a good idea at the time. I gestured to the protocols framed on the wall. "Did you get the same speech about the rules? The supernatural safety guidelines?" James's expression became guarded. "Those aren't speeches, Sarah, and they're not guidelines. You grew up here, right? You know the stories." "I know stories. That doesn't make them real." "Yeah." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos, then handed it to me. "Took these myself 2 weeks ago, about 5 miles north of here near the West Mitten Formation." The photo showed a set of tracks in red desert sand. They started as human footprints, barefoot, clear toes, normal stride, normal spacing. Then, over the course of maybe 15 or 20 feet, they transformed. The prints became more elongated, the toes turned into claws. The stride lengthened impossibly. The depth and shape changed. By the end of the sequence, they were coyote tracks, perfect in every detail. Then, another 10 feet later, they transitioned back to human prints. I examined the photos closely, zooming in, looking for any sign of manipulation or staging. The lighting was consistent, the shadows fell correctly, the sand around the prints showed natural wind patterns and undisturbed texture. If this was faked, it was extremely well done. "Could be 2 different trails that happened to intersect," I said. "Could be," James agreed quietly. "Except I followed these tracks for almost 3 miles. Started human, turned to coyote, back to human, to coyote again. Found them near a dead sheep, throat torn out, not eaten, just killed. And the tracks led away from the sheep toward the rock formations and vanished into solid stone. Not around the formation, Sarah. Into it, like whatever made these tracks walked through rock." I handed his phone back. "There has to be a rational explanation." "Yeah, there is." He pocketed his phone. "Something that can walk as a human or an animal was out here 2 weeks ago. Something that killed livestock for fun and can apparently phase through solid rock. The rational explanation is that the stories your grandmother told you, the ones you probably stopped listening to when you left for Denver, those stories are real. And now you're back in the place where they happen." The radio on James's belt crackled. "Unit 7. Unit 7. This is dispatch. We have a welfare check requested at a location 15 miles north of your position. Elderly resident, no contact for 4 days. Family is concerned." James keyed the radio. "Unit 7 responding. Send the coordinates." He looked at me. "Ready for your first call?" I touched my badge, feeling its weight, thinking about Emily driving these same roads, responding to similar calls, slowly learning that the protocols weren't superstition, but survival. "Let's go." As we walked toward the patrol vehicle, I glanced back at the framed protocols on the wall. Rule 5 caught my eye. Highway 163 between the Mittens and Mexican Hat is particularly dangerous during new moon phases. I pulled out my phone and checked the date. 2 days until new moon. "Sarah?" James was already in the driver's seat. "You coming?" "Yeah." I climbed into the passenger seat, feeling the desert heat immediately through the window. "Just checking something." As we pulled onto Highway 163, heading north toward the Mittens, I watched the formations rise around us, casting long afternoon shadows across the desert floor. In 8 years, I'd almost forgotten how big they were, how ancient they looked, how easy it would be for something to hide in the spaces between them. James drove carefully, his eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and the desert on either side. Professional, alert, but also watchful in a way that went beyond normal patrol awareness. Like he was looking for something specific. "Emily was a good cop," he said after a few minutes of silence. "Smart, careful, respected the protocols. Everyone liked working with her. But about 6 months before she died, something changed. She started taking extra shifts, volunteering for night patrols, asking questions about old cases. It was like she was investigating something but wouldn't tell anyone what." He glanced at me. "Captain Sosi thinks she was trying to figure out what happened to some missing persons cases from a few years back. People who disappeared on Highway 163 and were never found." "How many people?" 7 in the last 3 years, all during new moon phases, all on this highway between here and Mexican Hat." He pointed ahead where the road stretched straight toward the horizon, formations on either side. "This stretch right here is the worst. Something about the layout of the formations, the way sound carries, the isolation. It's always been bad, but it's getting worse." The radio crackled again. "Unit 7, be advised. Welfare check location is at the old Yazi Hogan, approximately 2 miles east of East Mitten. No road access. You'll need to hike in from Highway 163. Requesting officer advise when on scene." "Copy that, dispatch," James responded. He looked at me. "You good to hike? It'll be rough terrain." "I'm good." We drove in silence for another 10 minutes, the formations growing larger as we approached. The Mittens rose on our left, massive buttes that really did look like a pair of mittens reaching toward the sky. Tourists probably stopped here every day to take photos, completely unaware of the history hidden in the shadows, the things that moved between these rocks after dark, the reason the protocols existed. James pulled onto the shoulder near a weathered trail marker. "From here we hike. Stay close, watch your footing, and Sarah." He hesitated. "If you see anything weird, anything that doesn't feel right, you tell me immediately. Don't try to explain it away. Don't rationalize it. Just tell me. You're really serious about all this." Emily wasn't the first officer we lost out here. His expression was grim. "And if we don't follow the protocols, if we don't respect what lives in this valley, she won't be the last." We started hiking into the desert, toward a welfare check that probably wouldn't be routine, leaving the patrol vehicle behind on Highway 163, 2 officers walking into the afternoon heat, with the massive formations watching overhead like ancient gods. And somewhere in the back of my mind, Emily's voice from years ago, telling me stories I'd dismissed as childhood myths. "The rules keep us safe, Sarah. The old ones have rules, and so do we. You break the rules, you pay the price." I was about to learn exactly what that price was. The hike took 45 minutes across terrain, that shifted between packed red sand and loose rock. The afternoon sun beat down with the kind of intensity that makes you understand why our ancestors built hogans with thick walls and small windows. James moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this walk 100 times, while I felt every one of my 8 years away from the reservation in my burning lungs and aching legs. Denver had gyms, but nothing prepares you for high desert hiking at 5,000 feet elevation. The Yazi Hogan appeared as we crested a low rise, a traditional 8-sided structure built from logs and red earth, the doorway facing east as tradition required. But something was wrong. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the door standing open, unusual for a Hogan, and the complete absence of movement around a dwelling that should have shown signs of life. No smoke from the stovepipe, no dogs barking, no chickens pecking in the yard. Just silence and stillness in the afternoon heat. "Stay behind me," James said quietly, his hand moving to his service weapon. "Something's wrong here." We approached slowly, professionally, the way you approach any scene that might be dangerous. But as we got closer, the wrongness intensified. Flies buzzed around the open doorway in thick clouds. The smell hit us at 20 feet, sweet and rotten and unmistakable. Death, and not recent. The body was just inside the doorway. Hastian Yazi, 82 years old according to the welfare check request, lying face down with his arms stretched toward the outside as if he'd been trying to crawl out when he died. He wore traditional clothing, velvet shirt and jeans, his silver hair still bound in the traditional way. From the state of decomposition and the smell, he'd been dead for at least 3 or 4 days, probably longer. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. James keyed his radio, his voice steady despite what we were seeing. "We have a deceased individual at the welfare check location. Elderly male, appears to have been dead several days. Requesting medical examiner and additional units." "Copy, Unit 7. Medical examiner is 3 hours out from your location. Are there signs of foul play?" James looked at me, then at the interior of the Hogan visible past the body. "Stand by on that, dispatch." I pulled on latex gloves and stepped carefully around the body to look inside. What I saw made my professional training war with an instinct that screamed at me to leave immediately, to get back to the patrol vehicle, to get away from this place. The interior of the Hogan had been destroyed, but not randomly. 3 separate piles of ash sat arranged in a perfect triangle in the center of the single room, each pile maybe 2 feet in diameter, still holding their shape despite days of air movement through the open door. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges in the wood that looked like they'd been made with claws or knives. But the scratches appeared at 3 distinct heights, the lowest set about 2 feet from the ground, the middle set at 4 feet, the highest set at 7 feet. Some of the highest scratches were so deep, they'd gone through the logs. The furniture had been overturned but not damaged. Hastan Yazi's belongings were scattered but not destroyed. And in the dust on the floor, between the ash piles, were footprints. Human feet, bare, adult-sized. They circled the ash piles in a pattern that made no sense, appearing and disappearing randomly, as if whoever made them had been walking, then vanishing, then walking again in a different spot. "James," I called. "You need to see this." He joined me at the doorway, careful not to disturb the body. I watched his face as he took in the scene, saw his expression shift from professional assessment to something like recognition, and then fear. "The ash piles," he said quietly. "That's a binding ritual, an attempt to trap something or hold something in place." "A ritual? James, this is a crime scene. We need to process it properly. photograph everything, collect evidence. And we will. But Sarah, those scratch marks at 3 different heights? That's the same pattern Emily documented in her reports, the ones she found at multiple locations before she died. And the ash piles arranged in a triangle, that's traditional protection. Hastian Yazi was trying to protect himself from something. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos, falling back on procedure, because procedure was all I had to make sense of this. We need to check the perimeter, look for signs of forced entry, tire tracks, anything that indicates who was here. We spent the next 20 minutes documenting the scene. I photographed everything: the body, the interior, the scratches, the ash piles, the footprints in the dust. James checked the perimeter, walking a slow circle around the hogan. When he called me over, his voice was tight with tension. "Sarah, back here." Behind the hogan, partially hidden by a low rise of rock, we found Hasten Yazi's livestock. 3 sheep and 2 goats, all dead, all killed with surgical precision. Their throats had been cut cleanly, almost professionally, but not a drop of blood remained on the ground around them. The sand was dry, undisturbed, as if the blood had been removed or had never existed. The animals were arranged in a line, evenly spaced, positioned with their heads pointing toward the hogan. "This doesn't make sense," I said. "Where's the blood? 5 animals, throats cut. There should be gallons of blood. The sand should be soaked. It doesn't make sense if you're thinking about it like a Denver cop investigating a normal crime." James photographed the dead animals, his movements mechanical. But if you think about it like someone who grew up hearing the stories, who knows what the protocols are trying to protect us from, then it makes perfect sense. Something was here. Something that kills without leaving normal evidence. Something that scratches walls at 3 different heights because it can change size or shape. Something that a traditional elder tried to bind with ash and failed. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the formations in shades of orange and red. The shadows were lengthening, and the temperature was starting to fall. In another hour, it would be dark, and we were 2 miles from our vehicle in rough terrain, with a crime scene that violated every law of physics and biology I'd been taught. "We need to photograph the perimeter and then get back to the vehicle before dark," James said. "We can come back tomorrow with the medical examiner and process this properly in daylight." I was about to agree when I saw movement between the formations to the north. Just a flicker, something shifting in the shadows cast by West Mitten Butte. I turned fully, focusing on the spot, my hand instinctively moving to my weapon. "James, north, between the formations, something's moving." He turned, following my gaze. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I saw it again, and this time it was clearer. A figure, human-shaped but walking wrong. The joints bent in ways that human joints shouldn't bend. The movement was fluid but stuttering, like stop-motion animation, like frames of video skipping. It was maybe 300 yards away, moving parallel to our position, not approaching, but not leaving either. "There's another one," James said, pointing east, "and another one west." 3 figures, human-shaped, but moving with that same wrong, impossible gait. They were surrounding us, or bracketing our position, staying at a distance but clearly aware of us. I couldn't make out details at this range in the failing light, but I could see enough to know that these weren't normal people. The way they moved, the way they seemed to flicker between positions, the way they maintained perfect spacing from each other, it was coordinated and inhuman. Then, the whistling started. 3 sources, north, east, and west, the same pattern from each direction. A melody that wasn't quite a melody, notes that made my teeth hurt and my skin crawl. The whistling was synchronized perfectly. the three sources creating a harmony that shouldn't have been possible without electronic coordination. Protocol 3, James said, his voice tight. Multiple direction whistling. We leave. Now. We can't leave a crime scene unprocessed. Sarah. He grabbed my arm, his grip hard. Protocol 3 exists because officers who stayed died. We leave now. We come back with backup in daylight. We don't investigate. We don't approach. We leave. The whistling grew louder, and the three figures moved closer, still maintaining that perfect spacing, still moving with that wrong, broken gait. I could see more details now in the dying light. They were tall, too tall, and pale, too pale, and the way they held their bodies suggested bones that didn't quite fit inside their skin. We ran. Not a tactical retreat, not a measured withdrawal. We ran through the desert with the whistling following us, growing louder, shifting in pitch and tone. I could hear James's breathing, harsh and scared, could hear my own blood pounding in my ears, could hear the whistling surrounding us from three directions, could hear something else beneath it all, a clicking sound like insects or bones snapping. The hike that had taken 45 minutes on the way in took us 20 minutes of hard running on the way out. We reached the patrol vehicle just as full darkness fell, the formations around us becoming massive black shapes against the stars. The whistling stopped the moment we closed the vehicle doors, cutting off so abruptly that the silence was worse than the sound had been. James started the engine and pulled onto Highway 163, accelerating hard, putting distance between us and the Hogan. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. Finally, he keyed the radio. Dispatch, Unit 7. Scene is not secure. Requesting no additional units respond until daylight. We encountered possible suspects and withdrew per safety protocols. We'll provide full briefing when we return to station. Copy, Unit 7. Medical examiner advised to hold until daylight. Return to station for debriefing. We drove back to the station in silence. Captain Sosi was waiting, and I gave him a full report, professional and detailed, describing everything we'd found. I didn't mention the three figures or the whistling, but James did, his voice flat and factual, treating it like any other suspect sighting. The scene will keep until morning, Captain Sosi said. You both did the right thing withdrawing. Get some rest. We'll assemble a larger team for tomorrow. I went to my temporary housing, a small efficiency apartment the department had arranged for me while I found permanent lodging. It was basic, but clean. One room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bed. I was exhausted from the hike and the adrenaline crash, but I knew I wouldn't sleep. I made coffee, reviewed my photos from the scene, trying to find some rational explanation for what we'd found. At 2:47 in the morning, exactly the same time the phone call about Emily's death had come 3 months ago, something knocked on my door. 3 times, precise and deliberate. Knock, 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 then silence. I sat frozen on my bed, coffee mug halfway to my lips, staring at the door. Protocol 4, I thought. 3 knocks, and then stopping. Don't open the door. Don't look outside. Wait 15 minutes in silence. Sarah. Emily's voice, muffled but clear, coming from just beyond the door. Sarah, please. I'm cold. Let me in. My sister's voice. The voice I'd grown up hearing every day. The voice I'd heard on phone calls for years. The voice I'd identified her body by when the medical examiner needed confirmation. Emily's voice, speaking to me from beyond a door, asking to be let in. Sarah, please. The voice was pleading now, exactly the way Emily used to sound when she wanted something from me when we were kids. I'm so cold. It's so cold out here. Please let me in. I wanted to open the door. Every instinct screamed at me to open it, to let my sister in from the cold. But Emily had been dead for 3 months. Emily was buried in the cemetery outside Window Rock. Emily's voice should not be calling to me from outside my door at 2:47 in the morning. Protocol 2. Verify who they are before opening. Do not trust the voice alone. I set down my coffee mug carefully, my hands shaking. I remembered seeing sage in one of the kitchen cabinets earlier, left by a previous tenant probably. I found it, a bundle of dried white sage, bound with red string. My grandmother had taught me about sage when I was young, how to burn it for protection and cleansing before I'd left for Denver and stopped believing in such things. I lit the sage with my lighter, watching it smolder and smoke. The smell filled the small apartment immediately, sharp and clean and somehow reassuring. I held the burning bundle and began to recite words I hadn't spoken in 8 years, protection prayers in Navajo that my grandmother had taught me, that I'd dismissed as superstition, that now felt like the only shield between me and whatever was outside my door. Sarah. The voice was different now, still Emily's pitch and tone, but with something underneath it, something old and cold and angry. Sarah, let me in, let me in, let me in. The doorknob rattled. The door shook in its frame, but I kept praying, kept burning the sage, kept myself from moving toward that door no matter how much Emily's voice pleaded and then demanded and then threatened. The assault on the door lasted until dawn. Sometimes it was Emily's voice. Sometimes it was other voices. My grandmother, my mother, people I'd known growing up. Sometimes it was scratching, those same 3-height scratches from the Hogan walls. Sometimes it was just silence, which was somehow worse, waiting for the next sound. When the first light of dawn touched the window, everything stopped. The doorknob stilled. The voices ceased. The scratching ended. I waited another full hour before I dared to move, still holding the sage bundle burned down to almost nothing. I opened the door carefully, morning light flooding in. There was nothing outside. No tracks in the dirt, no scratches on the door, no sign that anything had been there at all. Except on the ground directly in front of my door, arranged in a perfect line, were 3 coyote teeth, white and clean, obviously placed deliberately. Sarah. James's voice made me jump. He was walking up the path to my apartment, looking like he hadn't slept either. You okay? You look... It came to my door last night. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. 3:47 a.m., 3 knocks, then Emily's voice asking to be let in. It tried all night to get me to open the door. James looked at the coyote teeth, his expression grim. You followed protocol too? Yes. Didn't open the door. Burned sage. Prayed. Good. He kicked the teeth away from the doorway. It's marking you now. Whatever killed Emily, whatever was at that Hogan, it knows you're here. It knows you're investigating, and it's claiming you. I stepped outside fully, into the morning sunlight, still holding the burned-down sage bundle. The formations rose around Monument Valley in the early light, beautiful and ancient, and suddenly terrifying. Somewhere out there, between those rocks, 3 figures were waiting. 3 things that could mimic voices, that could scratch walls at 3 different heights, that had killed Haston, Yazzie, and Emily, and who knew how many others. And now they knew exactly where I lived. Captain Sosi called me into his office the next morning before shift. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, the lines around his eyes deeper, his expression haunted. On his desk were stacks of files, old case folders going back years, and a cardboard box labeled with Emily's name. The medical examiner retrieved Hassan Yazi's body this morning with a 6-officer escort. He said without preamble, "They found more evidence consistent with what you reported. The ash piles, the scratches, the livestock, and they found something else. Journal entries hidden in a metal box buried under the floor of the Hogan. Hassan Yazi had been documenting strange occurrences for the last 2 years. Deaths, disappearances, sightings. He was investigating the same pattern your sister was." He pushed the box across the desk toward me. "Emily's personal effects. Her apartment was cleared out after she died, but I held on to these because I knew you'd want them eventually. I think you need to see them now." Inside the box were Emily's belongings from her last months: her badge, her off-duty weapon, some photographs, and 3 notebooks filled with her handwriting. I opened the first one with shaking hands. The entries started 6 months before her death. Responded to missing person report, Highway 163 near mile marker 42. Jennifer Begay, 28, last seen 3 days ago. Vehicle found abandoned, no signs of struggle, personal effects inside. Tracks near vehicle showed human prints transitioning to animal prints. Dispatch said to log it as left seen voluntarily. But something's wrong. This is the 4th disappearance in 18 months on this same stretch of highway. I flipped through the pages, watching Emily's investigation unfold in her careful handwriting. She'd mapped the disappearances, 7 people over 3 years, all during new moon phases. She'd interviewed families, reviewed old police reports going back decades, found patterns that no one else had connected, and she'd started to understand what was hunting people on Highway 163. 3 of them, always 3. Witnesses report seeing 3 figures moving between the formations at night. The old stories talk about witches who work in covens of 3, who can transform, who hunt during the darkest nights. I think they're real. I think they've been hunting on this highway for years, maybe longer. And I think they're protected by someone, because every investigation gets shut down, every report gets buried, every witness gets dismissed. The last entry was dated 2 days before her death. I know who they are: Marcus Totachin, Angela Yazi, Robert Blackhorse. They're connected to every disappearance, always present in the area, always with alibis that don't quite hold up. I have surveillance photos of them meeting at midnight near Sentinel Mesa. Tomorrow night is new moon. I'm going to follow them, document what they do, get proof. Then I'm taking everything to the FBI. If something happens to me, if this journal is found, someone needs to know the truth. Tell Sarah I'm sorry I didn't call more. Tell her I love her. Tell her to be careful if she comes home." I read the last lines 3 times, tears blurring the words. Emily had known. She'd figured it out, documented it all, and then they'd killed her for getting too close. "The 3 names she identified," I said, my voice rough. "Are they still in the area?" "Yes, and that's the problem." Captain Sosi opened one of the old case files. Marcus Totachin, 52 years old, works as a ranch hand, lives alone near Goulding's Lodge. He's been questioned in connection with multiple incidents but never charged. Always has an alibi, always has a reasonable explanation. Angela Yazi, 38, traditional healer, respected in the community until about 4 years ago, when people started saying she'd gone wrong, started practicing the dark ceremonies. Robert Blackhorse, 45, disappeared 6 months ago, presumed dead. Then he showed up 3 months ago, like nothing had happened. Wouldn't say where he'd been, acts different now. People say his eyes are wrong. He pulled out surveillance photos. James has been watching them since Emily died. These were taken a week ago. The photos showed 3 people meeting at night near Sentinel Mesa. Even in the grainy long-distance shots, something about them was wrong. The way they stood too still, the way their shadows fell at incorrect angles, the way their eyes reflected the camera flash like animals' eyes. In one photo, you could see Marcus Totocin's face clearly, and he was smiling directly at the camera, as if he knew he was being photographed and didn't care. "We need to bring them in for questioning," I said. "On what grounds? Suspicious behavior? Meeting in public areas? We have no physical evidence connecting them to any crime." Emily knew that. That's why she was trying to catch them in the act. Captain Sosi closed the file. "But I'm not sending another officer into the field against them without proper protection. Traditional protection. Sarah, I need you to meet someone." An hour later, James and I drove to a traditional hogan 20 miles south of Monument Valley near the Utah-Arizona border. The structure was old but well-maintained, smoke rising from the stovepipe, a truck from the 1980s parked outside. An elderly man sat in a folding chair near the doorway, watching our approach with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Hastian Nez was 86 years old, according to Captain Sosi, but he moved with surprising strength as he stood to greet us. He wore traditional clothing, velvet shirt and turquoise jewelry, his white hair bound in the traditional way. His face was weathered from decades in the desert sun, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Sarah Nez," he said in Navajo, then switched to English. "Your grandmother's granddaughter, Emily's sister. I knew you would come home eventually. Your grandmother told me you would, though she wished you'd come sooner." "You knew my grandmother?" "I knew your great-grandmother better. She was a medicine woman, a diagnostician, one of the strongest I ever met. She taught me many things before she died." He gestured toward the hogan. "Come inside. We need to talk about your bloodline and why you're in danger." Inside, the hogan was traditional in every way. Wood stove for heat, simple furniture, medicine bundles hanging from the ceiling, the smell of sage and cedar. Hastian Nez gestured for us to sit, then began to build a small fire in the center of the floor, using cedar and other materials I didn't recognize. "Your family," he said, feeding the fire carefully, "has always produced boundary walkers. People who can see what others miss, who can walk between the world of the living and the world of spirits, who can confront the old things that hunt in the darkness. Your great-grandmother had this gift. Your grandmother had it, but chose not to develop it fully. Your mother refused it entirely. Emily had it and was just beginning to understand when she was killed. And me. You ran from it. Went to Denver, became a city cop, convinced yourself the old ways were superstition. But the gift doesn't care what you believe. It's in your blood. And now you're back, and the old things know you're here. That's why they came to your door. That's why they're marking you. They remember your bloodline, and they fear it." James spoke up. "The 3 people Emily identified in her journal, Marcus, Angela, Robert, are they what we think they are?" Hastian Nez's expression darkened. "Yes, they've walked the dark path, performed the forbidden ceremonies, killed for power. They are Yi Nal Lushi now, no longer fully human. They hunt together, 3 forming a coven, using the new moon darkness to take victims. They've been operating for years, protected by fear and the fact that most people don't believe such things exist anymore." "How do we stop them?" I asked. "You can't. Not as you are now." He reached for one of the medicine bundles hanging from the ceiling. "But I can teach you protection, and if you're willing to learn, I can teach you how to confront them. It will take time, dedication, and faith in things you've spent 8 years denying. I'll do whatever it takes. Good. He opened the bundle and began to lay out materials. Corn pollen, sage, ash from sacred fires, small stones, pieces of turquoise and jet. We begin with protection. Then we teach you the songs, the prayers, the protocols that go deeper than the ones on your station wall. And most importantly, we teach you about the 3 offerings. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in 2 worlds. During the day, I was Officer Sarah Nez, working regular patrol shifts with James, investigating the deaths, building a case file that combined modern police work with traditional knowledge. At night and on my days off, I was with Hastien Nez, learning ceremonies I'd forgotten, songs I'd ignored as a child, understanding that had been passed down through my bloodline for generations. The protection ceremony was complex. Hastien Nez created a medicine bundle specifically for me, filling a small leather pouch with corn pollen, sacred ash, herbs whose names I learned in Navajo, and a small piece of turquoise that had belonged to my grandmother. As he assembled it, he sang in a language older than modern Navajo, words that made the air in the hogan feel thick and charged. "This will protect you from direct harm," he explained, "but only if you carry it with faith. The moment you doubt, the moment you think of it as just a pouch of herbs, its power weakens. You must believe, Sarah, not with your mind, but with your spirit." He taught me protective songs, short prayers in Navajo that could be chanted quickly in moments of danger. He taught me how to recognize the signs of spiritual danger, the feeling of wrongness that precedes supernatural attack, the subtle shifts in temperature and air pressure that indicate something ancient is near. And he taught me about the 3 offerings, the ancient protocol for confronting entities that existed before human law. "When you face them," he said during our 5th session, "when you stand between them and their prey, you cannot fight with weapons alone. You must understand the old bargain, the ancient treaty between humans and the things that walked this land before us. The 3 offerings: acknowledgement, respect, and choice. You acknowledge their power, you respect their ancient rights, and then you offer choice. A trade, a bargain, a sacrifice that satisfies the old laws. Only then can you banish them, and only if your bloodline gives you the authority to make such offers." "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "That depends on the situation. Sometimes it's an object of power, sometimes it's a promise or a binding, sometimes it's blood, your own blood, freely given to seal the bargain and pay the price for banishment." The investigation continued parallel to my training. James and I coordinated with Captain Tsosi, building evidence against Marcus Totachin, Angela Yazzie, and Robert Blackhorse. We couldn't arrest them for supernatural crimes, but we could investigate them for the human aspects of their actions, the disappearances, the deaths, the evidence left at crime scenes. We established surveillance on all 3 suspects, rotating officers to watch their movements. What we found was disturbing in its banality. Marcus went to work every day at the ranch, came home at night, lived a seemingly normal life. Angela saw clients for traditional healing, though fewer than before, and spent her evenings alone. Robert worked odd jobs and kept to himself, rarely speaking to anyone. But on new moon nights, they met. Always at Sentinel Mesa, always at midnight, always performing some kind of ceremony. We couldn't get close enough to see details without risking exposure, but we photographed them from a distance, documented their meetings, built a pattern of behavior. 3 weeks after I'd arrived in Monument Valley, James called me at 6 in the morning. Sarah, you need to see this. We found their workshop. The abandoned trading post sat 15 miles north of Monument Valley, accessible only by a rough dirt road that most people had forgotten existed. The building was old, probably from the 1930s, weathered wood and broken windows, officially abandoned for 30 years. But fresh tire tracks led to it, and someone had cleared the entrance recently. We approached with Captain Sosi and 4 other officers, in daylight, with full documentation and a search warrant based on anonymous tip about illegal activity. The interior of the trading post made the hair on my neck stand up. The main room had been converted into a ritual space. The walls were covered in symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood, complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. The floor showed evidence of repeated ceremonies, ash circles layered over ash circles, burn marks and stains. In the back room, we found their supplies: bone fragments, both human and animal, jars of substances I didn't want to identify, tools that had clearly been used in ceremonies, knives with ornate handles and suspicious stains, and photographs. Dozens of photographs of people, including several of the missing persons from Highway 163, and recent photos of me, taken from a distance, showing me at my apartment, at the station, hiking to crime scenes. They'd been watching me since I arrived. "Bag everything," Captain Sosi ordered. "This is evidence. We might not be able to prosecute them for what they are, but we can get them for this." We were loading evidence into vehicles when a truck pulled up on the dirt road. Marcus Totocina, Angela Yazzie, and Robert Blackhorse arriving together, making no attempt to flee when they saw the police presence. They just parked and walked toward us with the confidence of people who believed they were untouchable. Marcus smiled as he approached, that same smile from the surveillance photos. Up close, he looked normal, just a middle-aged man in ranch clothes and work boots. But his eyes were wrong, too reflective, catching the light like an animal's eyes even in full daylight. "Officers," he said pleasantly. "Can we help you?" "Marcus Totocin?" Captain Sosi stepped forward. "Angela Yazzie, Robert Blackhorse. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an ongoing investigation. We'd like to ask you some questions." "Of course." Marcus's smile widened. He looked directly at me. "Officer Nez, Emily's sister. We've been expecting you. Your sister spoke about you often in her last moments. Kept calling your name, actually. Sarah, help me. It was quite touching." The rage that filled me was white-hot and instant. I stepped forward before I could think, my hand moving toward my weapon, every professional instinct overridden by the need to hurt this man who was describing my sister's death like it was entertainment. James grabbed my arm, holding me back. "Sarah, don't. That's what they want." Marcus laughed, a sound that was too high-pitched, too prolonged, not quite human. "Your sister tasted like copper and fear. Did you know fear has a flavor? It's bitter and sharp, like green chili, but more complex. She was delicious, and you will be too when we finally take you. Soon, I think. Very soon." "You're under arrest," Captain Sosi said, his voice hard. "All 3 of you. Suspicion of multiple murders, desecration of human remains, and about a dozen other charges. You have the right to remain silent. We know our rights." Angela spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly soft. "And we know our protections. You'll hold us for 24 hours, maybe 48. Then our lawyer will get us released. You have no physical evidence connecting us to any actual deaths. Just this workshop, which we'll claim was used for traditional ceremonies, completely legal under the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. You can't touch us, Captain. Not with your laws." Robert Blackhorse hadn't spoken at all. He just stared at me with eyes that were completely wrong, pupils too large, whites too white, the color shifting from brown to gold and back again in the changing light. When he finally smiled, I saw that his teeth were filed to points. "The new moon is in 3 days," he said, his voice rasping like sandpaper on wood. "Highway 163 calls for another offering. We're wondering if it will be you, Sarah Nez, or perhaps someone you care about. That would be fitting, wouldn't it? A matched set of sisters, taken on the same highway, by the same hands." They let us arrest them. Didn't resist, didn't argue, just allowed themselves to be handcuffed and placed in vehicles with that same unsettling confidence. As we drove back to the station, I watched Marcus in the rearview mirror. He was humming something, a melody that made my teeth hurt, and smiling like he'd just won a game I didn't know we were playing. Captain Sosi was right. They were released 36 hours later. Their lawyer, a sharp woman from Phoenix, argued religious freedom, lack of physical evidence, violation of search protocols. The judge agreed, released them on their own recognizance, set a hearing date for 3 months out that everyone knew would result in dismissal. That evening, Hastin Nez came to the station, something he'd never done before. He looked grave, older somehow, as if he'd aged years in the past few days. "They've accelerated their timeline," he said. "They were planning to take someone during the next new moon, but now they know you're a threat. They'll move faster, try to eliminate you before you can complete your training. Sarah, you need to understand something. If they take you, if they perform their ceremony on you, you won't just die. They'll consume everything you are, your memories, your power, your bloodline. Everything your family has protected for generations will be lost." "Then we stop them first," I said. "We know their pattern, their timeline. New moon is in 3 days. They'll be on Highway 163 hunting. We set up a coordinated operation, multiple units, FBI backup, and we catch them in the act." "And if catching them isn't enough?" Hastin Nez asked quietly. "If your modern law enforcement can't hold them? What then?" I touched the medicine bundle hanging around my neck, hidden under my uniform shirt. I thought about the 3 offerings, about my bloodline, about Emily dying alone on that highway calling my name. Then I do what my family was meant to do. I become a boundary walker, and I stop them the old way. Hastin Nez nodded slowly. "Then we have 2 days to complete your training. 2 days to teach you everything your grandmother should have taught you, everything Emily was learning when she died. 2 days to prepare you for a confrontation that will determine whether you survive or join your sister." He looked at Captain Sosi. "You'll need to plan your operation for New Moon Night. But understand this, the moment they begin their ceremony, your modern weapons will be useless. Sarah will have to face them alone, according to the old laws, with only her bloodline and her training to protect her. Can you accept that?" "No," Captain Sosi said, "but I don't think I have a choice. We've tried the modern way. It didn't work for Emily. It won't work for Sarah. So we do it your way, the old way, and we pray to whoever's listening that it's enough." The sun was setting over Monument Valley, painting the formations in shades of red and gold. In 3 days, new moon. In 3 days, darkness absolute. In 3 days, Highway 163 would become a hunting ground again, and I would either stop the hunters or join their victims. I watched the sunset through the station windows and felt the weight of my bloodline settle onto my shoulders like a physical thing. Generations of women who'd walked this same path, fought these same battles, paid these same prices. Emily had tried alone and failed. I wouldn't be alone. I had James, Captain Sosi, Hastin Nez, and the accumulated knowledge of my family. But most importantly, I had something Emily hadn't fully developed before she died. I had rage, purpose, and the absolute certainty that I would make Marcus Totachin, Angela Yazzie, and Robert Blackhorse pay for every person they'd killed, every family they'd destroyed, every life they'd stolen. 3 days until new moon. 3 days to prepare. 3 days until I learned whether my grandmother's bloodline was strong enough to stop 3 ancient predators who'd been hunting in Monument Valley since before America existed. The formations outside grew dark as night fell, and somewhere between those massive stones, 3 figures were waiting, planning, preparing for the hunt they'd conducted dozens of times before. But this time, their prey would be ready. This time, the hunters would become the hunted. New moon night arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures dropping toward freezing. By 8 p.m., 23 officers had assembled at the staging area near Mexican Hat, a collection point 15 miles south of the target zone on Highway 163. Navajo Nation Police, FBI agents from the Four Corners Field Office, Utah Highway Patrol, and even 2 federal marshals who'd driven down from Salt Lake City. The largest coordinated operation in Monument Valley history, all focused on catching 3 suspects during what Captain Sosi had carefully described as ritual activity connected to multiple homicides. The FBI special agent in charge was a woman named Jennifer Carr, maybe 40 years old, with the crisp efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years working organized crime and terrorism cases. She'd listened to our briefing with increasing skepticism, her expression shifting from professional interest to barely concealed doubt when Captain Sosi started describing the supernatural elements. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, spreading surveillance photos across the hood of her vehicle. "You believe these 3 individuals, Marcus Totachin, Angela Yazzie, and Robert Blackhorse, are responsible for 7 disappearances over 3 years. But you're also saying they're practitioners of Native American witchcraft who can transform into animals and summon supernatural entities." "I'm saying the evidence supports both conclusions," Captain Sosi replied calmly. "You've seen the forensics from the trading post, human remains, ritual implements, documentation of ceremonies. That's prosecutable under federal law. What else they might be capable of, you can decide for yourself when you see it." Agent Carr looked like she wanted to argue, but the evidence from the trading post was solid. DNA matches to 2 of the missing persons, ritual tools with traceable blood evidence, detailed journals documenting ceremonies that clearly described human sacrifice. Whether or not she believed in witchcraft, she believed in murder, and that was enough to get FBI cooperation. "We set up a perimeter," she said, making decisions. 8 units stationed at intervals along Highway 163 from the Mittens to Mexican Hat. Night vision, thermal imaging, aerial support on standby. The moment they appear, we close in and take them into custody. Clean, professional, by the book. "They won't go quietly," James said. "They've never been afraid of police presence before. Then we'll be prepared for resistance." Agent Carr's tone left no room for argument. "I've handled armed standoffs, barricaded suspects, sovereign citizen, compounds. 3 individuals in open terrain isn't something that concerns me." I exchanged glances with Captain Sosi. He'd tried to warn her, shown her the evidence, explained what we were really facing. But you can't make someone believe in the supernatural through briefings and photos. They have to see it themselves. And by then, it's usually too late. James and I were assigned to Unit 3, positioned near the mittens, with night vision equipment and thermal imaging cameras. Our vehicle was a new Ford Explorer with upgraded communications and emergency lighting, standard patrol loadout, plus shotguns, extra ammunition, first aid kits. Everything by the book, as if this were a normal high-risk operation. I wore my uniform and my duty weapon, but under my shirt, hidden against my skin, I wore the medicine bundle Hastian Nez had prepared. In my pockets, I carried corn pollen and sacred ash, and in my mind, I held the songs and prayers I'd learned over the past 3 days, words older than English, older than modern Navajo, protection passed down through my bloodline for generations. We took our position at 9 p.m. The mittens rose like dark giants against the starlit sky, massive formations that looked different at night, less like tourist attractions and more like what they really were. Sacred places, old places, places where the boundary between worlds had always been thin. The highway stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert, illuminated only by starlight in the absence of the moon. All units, this is command. Agent Carr's voice crackled over the radio. We are in position. Maintain radio silence except for suspect sighting or emergency. Eyes open, stay alert. The hours crept by. 10 p.m., 11 p.m. The temperature dropped into the 20s, frost forming on the windshield. James and I took turns with the night vision equipment, scanning the formations and the highway, watching for any sign of movement. At 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared from the north. 3 vehicles traveling together, moving slowly down Highway 163. They stopped approximately 200 yards from our position, parking in a line across both lanes, blocking the highway. Command, this is Unit 3. James reported quietly. 3 vehicles stopped on Highway 163 near the mittens, occupants exiting vehicles, confirming visual identification. Marcus Toda Chin, Angela Yazzie, Robert Blackhorse. All units, stand by, Agent Carr ordered. Let them commit to whatever they're planning. We want documented evidence. Through the night vision equipment, I watched the 3 figures move away from their vehicles toward a clear area between the highway and the East Mitten formation. They wore traditional clothing, dark against the green glow of night vision, and they moved with purpose, setting up what looked like a ceremonial space. Marcus began drawing a circle in the sand, working with precision despite the darkness. Angela placed objects at cardinal points around the circle, items I couldn't identify from this distance. Robert stood in the center, arms raised, head tilted back toward the starless sky, and began to chant. The sound carried across the desert with impossible clarity, cutting through the closed windows of our vehicle, making my teeth ache and my skin crawl. It was the same whistling melody from the Hogan, but deeper now, more complex, harmonizing with itself in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. Command, they're performing some kind of ceremony, James reported. Recommend we move in now before they... The transformation happened so fast that night vision couldn't track it smoothly. One moment, Robert Blackhorse was human-shaped, arms raised, chanting. The next, he was something else. Taller, stretched, limbs too long and joints bending wrong. His clothes should have torn, but instead seemed to melt into skin that was too pale, too reflective. Marcus and Angela transformed simultaneously, their bodies shifting and crackling, bones restructuring, becoming something between human and animal, but worse than either. Jesus Christ, James whispered. The 3 figures in the circle weren't human anymore, but they weren't animals either. They stood on 2 legs but moved on all 4s, their spines bending in impossible curves. Their faces were stretched and wrong, maintaining hints of human features but twisted into something predatory. and their eyes. Their eyes caught the starlight and reflected it back in colors that hurt to look at, shifting spectrum from red to gold to green and back again. "All units, close in now." Agent Carr's voice had lost its professional calm. "Suspects are there. All units move in, contain, and apprehend." The three transformed figures threw back their heads and howled in perfect unison, a sound that shattered the driver's side window of our vehicle and set off car alarms in 2 of the FBI units half a mile away. Then they began chanting again, all 3 voices braiding together in harmony that made reality feel thin and fragile. Something answered from between the formations. It came from the darkness between the mittens, a place where nothing should exist, stepping out of solid rock like the stone was only a suggestion. 8 feet tall, pale as bone, impossibly thin with too many joints in its arms and legs. Its head was elongated, eyeless, but clearly aware of everything around it. It moved like stop-motion footage, flickering between positions rather than walking smoothly, here and then, there and then, somewhere else, with no transition between. The air around it distorted, heat shimmer in freezing temperatures, and where it stepped, the sand turned black and crystalline. "What the hell is that?" Someone screamed over the radio. "All units, weapons free. Engage the suspects." Agent Carr's professional composure was cracking. "Air support. We need eyes on this location now." 8. Police vehicles converged on Highway 163, sirens wailing, emergency lights painting the desert in flashes of red and blue. The entity turned toward the approaching vehicles, its eyeless face tracking movement with perfect precision. It raised one too long arm, fingers spreading, and Officer Tasba Yazzi's patrol unit flipped end over end, as if struck by an invisible giant. The vehicle rolled 3 times and landed on its roof. The entity flickered, suddenly beside the overturned Explorer, moving without crossing the space between. It reached down, gripped the vehicle's frame, and tore it open like paper. The shriek of rending metal carried across the desert, followed by Tasba's screams, and then sudden, absolute silence. "Officer down! Officer down!" Multiple voices shouting over the radio. "All units, fall back! Establish perimeter at..." The 3 transformed figures moved, not running, but covering ground impossibly fast, flickering like the entity, appearing beside FBI vehicles and patrol units. Angela landed on the hood of Unit 5, her 2 long fingers punching through the windshield. Marcus ran alongside Unit 7 at what must have been 90 miles per hour, keeping pace effortlessly, tearing off the driver's side mirror and door. Robert leaped from vehicle to vehicle like they were stepping stones, each impact denting roofs and shattering windows. "Air support is reporting visual interference," the radio crackled. "Helicopters cannot maintain stable flight. They're turning back. All units, you're on your own." James floored the accelerator, pulling onto Highway 163, racing south away from the entity and the transformed figures. Around us, the coordinated operation had dissolved into chaos. Vehicles scattered in all directions, some pursuing suspects, others fleeing, radio communications breaking down into screaming and static. I looked back through the rear window. The entity was feeding on Officer Tasba's body, its eyeless face pressed against her remains, pulling something intangible and glowing from her chest. The 3 transformed figures circled the scene, protecting it, their movements coordinated and predatory. "We need to regroup," James said, his voice shaking. "Get to the staging area, coordinate with command, figure out what the hell we're dealing with." "They'll follow us. They want me, James. This whole thing is about drawing me out." "Then we stay together. Keep moving. Don't give them a chance to isolate you." But even as he said it, I saw headlights in the rearview mirror. 3 vehicles moving too fast, closing the distance with impossible speed. Not pursuing, hunting. The transformed figures were in those vehicles now, or riding on top of them, using their own trucks to chase us down Highway 163. Command, this is Unit 3, James reported. We are being pursued by all 3 suspects, heading south on Highway 163, approaching mile marker 37. Request backup, request shit. Marcus appeared, on our hood, materializing from nothing. His transformed face pressed against the windshield, grinning with too many teeth. James swerved violently, trying to throw him off, but Marcus held on. His clawed fingers punched through the metal of the hood, anchoring himself. Angela appeared beside my window, running alongside the vehicle at 90 miles per hour, her pace perfectly matched to ours, her face level with mine. She smiled, reached out casually, and tore off the side mirror. Then she dropped back, letting us pull ahead, toying with us. Robert was somewhere behind. I could hear him on the roof, his claws scratching metal, finding purchase, weighing down the back of the vehicle. "Hold on!" James yanked the wheel hard left, pulling off the highway onto a dirt road that led deeper into the formations. We bounced over rough terrain, the vehicle's suspension screaming, emergency lights still flashing, illuminating red rock walls on either side. Marcus flew off the hood as we hit a sharp turn. Robert lost his grip and tumbled into the darkness. But Angela stayed with us, now running beside the passenger side, matching our speed over terrain that should have been impossible to navigate on foot at any speed. James slammed the brakes, throwing the vehicle into a skid. We stopped in a small clearing surrounded by rock formations, walls of stone on 3 sides, only one way out. A trap, but also a defensible position. "Out of the vehicle now," James ordered. "We make a stand here, back to the rocks. Don't let them surround us." We exited with weapons drawn, taking position against the rock wall. The 3 transformed figures appeared at the mouth of the clearing, blocking our escape. Behind them, the massive entity flickered into existence, its eyeless face turning toward us with predatory focus. For a moment, everything was still. Just us, them, and the cold, desert night with formations rising black against the stars. Then our radio crackled. Not dispatch, not Agent Carr, not any official communication. Emily's voice, clear and perfect and heartbreaking. "Sarah." My sister's voice came through the radio speaker, intimate and close. "Sarah, I'm here. I'm at the old trading post. I'm waiting for you. But you need to come alone. It has to be you. Please, Sarah, I need you." Marcus transformed back to human form, or something close to it, his body restructuring with sounds like breaking bones and tearing fabric. He smiled that horrible smile. "She's been calling for you," he said, his voice layered with harmonics that suggested multiple speakers. "Every night since we took her, crying your name, begging for help. We kept her alive for 3 days before we finally consumed her. 3 days of fear and pain, and calling for her sister, who never came. Will you come now, Sarah? Will you finally answer Emily's call?" I looked at James, saw the fear in his face, but also the determination. He knew what I had to do, what my bloodline required, what this had always been building toward. "I have to go," I said. "Not alone. That's what they want." "James," I touched his arm. "This was never about law enforcement. This was never about arrests or trials or modern justice. This is about my bloodline, my family, the old protocols. I have to face them alone. That's how it works." The radio crackled again. Emily's voice singing now. A lullaby our grandmother used to sing to us when we were children. Perfect pitch, perfect tone, perfectly heartbreaking. "The trading post," Marcus said. 23 miles north. Come alone. Come now, or we start hunting everyone you care about, one by one, and we'll make sure each of them calls your name as they die, just like Emily did. The three figures flickered and vanished. The entity dissolved like smoke, and I was left standing in a clearing in Monument Valley with my partner and my duty weapon, and a medicine bundle that felt impossibly heavy against my chest. "Sarah," James began, "I know the way. 23 miles north. I'll take one of their vehicles. They left them on the highway. You get back to command, tell them what happened, coordinate the search for Tazba." My voice was steadier than I felt. "And James, if I don't come back, tell Hastin Nez I tried. Tell him I followed the protocols. You're coming back. Maybe." I looked up at the formations towering around us. "But if I don't, promise me you'll keep learning. Keep following the old ways. Keep protecting people from what they don't believe in. Promise me, James." "I promise." I walked back toward Highway 163, toward the abandoned vehicles still sitting in the middle of the road, toward a 23-mile drive to the old trading post where something wearing my sister's voice was waiting. Behind me, James stood alone in that clearing, and I could feel his eyes on my back until I disappeared around the rock formation. The keys were still in Marcus's truck. I climbed in, started the engine, and began driving north on Highway 163, alone, heading toward a confrontation that would determine whether I survived or joined Emily, whether my bloodline's power was enough, or if I was about to learn the same lesson my sister had learned in her final moments. The formations watched as I drove past, ancient and silent and indifferent to human struggles. And somewhere ahead, in an abandoned trading post, 3 ancient predators and something worse were waiting for the last daughter of a bloodline that had hunted them for generations. 23 miles. 23 miles to find out if my grandmother's gift was strong enough to stop what Emily couldn't. The highway stretched ahead into absolute darkness, and I drove toward it without hesitation, because this was what my family had always done, what my bloodline had been preparing me for since birth, even when I was running from it in Denver. I was Sarah Nez. I was a boundary walker, and I was done running. The drive to the trading post took 30 minutes through absolute darkness. No moon, no other vehicles, just my headlights cutting through the night and the massive formations rising like silent witnesses on either side of the highway. I kept the radio off. Couldn't bear to hear Emily's voice again, that perfect imitation that was both her and not her, a mockery wrapped in memory. I prayed as I drove, not the prayers I'd learned in church as a child, but the older ones, the words Hastian Nez had taught me in his Hogan, syllables that felt heavy on my tongue, charged with the weight of generations. Protection songs my great-grandmother had sung, that my grandmother had whispered over Emily and me when we were babies, that had been passed down through my bloodline since before the long walk, since before the Spanish came, since before this land had any name but what our ancestors gave it. The medicine bundle hung around my neck, warm against my skin despite the freezing temperature. In my pockets, corn pollen and sacred ash. On my lips, words of power I was still learning to believe in. And in my heart, a clarity I hadn't felt since leaving Denver. This was always where I was meant to be. This moment, this confrontation, this choice between running and standing, between denying my heritage and embracing it. Emily had stood here too, I realized, not literally, but spiritually. She'd reached this same point, made this same choice, driven down this same highway, toward the same confrontation. But she'd been alone in a way I wasn't. She hadn't completed her training, hadn't fully understood the three offerings, hadn't learned the deepest songs. She'd tried to face them with incomplete knowledge and had paid the price. I wouldn't make the same mistake. The abandoned trading post appeared suddenly in my headlights, a weathered structure sitting back from the highway, surrounded by formations that seemed to lean in toward it like spectators gathering for a show. The same building where we'd found the ritual workshop weeks ago, now cleaned out by evidence techs but still radiating wrongness, still feeling like a wound in the landscape. 3 vehicles were parked outside: Marcus's truck, Angela's sedan, Robert's old pickup. Empty, doors open, engines still ticking with residual heat. They were here, waiting inside, confident enough to leave their vehicles exposed because they believed I would come alone, unarmed in the ways that mattered, insufficient to stop what they'd become. They were wrong about the last part. I parked 50 yards away, took a moment to center myself, to feel the medicine bundle's warmth, to remember everything Hastin Nez had taught me about the 3 offerings: acknowledgement, respect, choice, the ancient protocol for confronting entities that existed outside human law, that operated by rules older than police badges and handcuffs and Miranda rights. I stepped out into the freezing desert air. Stars overhead, millions of them, the Milky Way cutting across the sky like a river of light. The kind of sky you only see in high desert country, far from cities, where the darkness is absolute and the universe reveals itself without shame. "Emily," I whispered to that sky, to my sister's spirit if it could hear me. "I'm coming, not to join you, but to finish what you started, to stop them, to make sure no one else's sister has to make this drive." The trading post door stood open, spilling dim light from inside, firelight probably, flickering and orange and inviting in a way that made my skin crawl. I touched my service weapon, then left it holstered. This wouldn't be one with bullets. This required older weapons, older knowledge, older power. I walked toward the entrance, each step deliberate, each breath a prayer, each heartbeat a drumbeat, counting down to confrontation. The interior was exactly as we'd left it during the raid, except for one addition. Emily's belongings, items that should have been in evidence lockup or returned to our family, were arranged throughout the room like a shrine, or a mockery, or both. Her badge sitting on the windowsill, catching firelight. Her off-duty weapon disassembled on a table. Her uniform shirt hanging on the wall, torn and stained with rust brown that could only be blood. And photographs, dozens of them, showing Emily at different ages, childhood to adulthood, her life displayed like trophies. In the center of the room, the 3 ash piles from before had been rebuilt, arranged in their triangle pattern, and between them, bound with rope and trembling with terror, was a child. She looked maybe 7 years old, Navajo, with traditional turquoise jewelry still around her neck and wrists, her clothes torn and dirty, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes met mine with desperate hope and absolute fear in equal measure. Maria Begay, missing 3 days ago from near Goulding's lodge. The case file photo didn't do justice to how small she looked, how fragile, how utterly vulnerable in this place of death and ritual. "Hello, Sarah." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, Emily's voice but layered with harmonics that suggested something vast speaking through a human-shaped channel. "I'm so glad you came. I've been waiting for you. We've all been waiting." The entity stepped into the firelight from the back room, and I finally saw it clearly. 8 feet tall, impossibly thin, pale as bone with skin that looked translucent, showing hints of impossible anatomy beneath. No eyes, but clearly seeing. No mouth, but speaking with Emily's voice. Too many joints in its arms and legs. fingers that were too long and tipped with something between nails and claws. Marcus, Angela, and Robert stood behind it, still in their half-transformed state, human enough to stand upright, but clearly no longer fully human, their eyes reflecting firelight in colors that shifted and changed. "Your sister fought," the entity said, moving closer, flickering between positions rather than walking smoothly. "She struggled, tried to bargain. She offered herself in trade for a family she thought she could save. But she didn't understand the old protocols, didn't know the proper words, didn't have the knowledge to make a binding offer. So I took her breath, her warmth, her final thoughts. She tasted of determination and love and failure. And she called for you, Sarah. In her last moments, she didn't curse us or pray to your Christian God. She called your name. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah." Each repetition of my name was in Emily's exact voice, the way she'd said it 1,000 times growing up, and each repetition was a knife in my heart. "I can bring her back," the entity continued, and now its voice was only Emily's, perfect and achingly familiar. "That trade is permitted under the old laws, the child's life for your sister's restoration, an exchange of equivalent value. You can have Emily back, Sarah. You can undo her death. All you have to do is walk away, leave this child. Let us complete what we started. Your sister for this girl's life. Choose." The temptation was physical, a weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. To have Emily back, to undo the phone call at 2:47 in the morning, to erase 3 months of grief and guilt and rage, to have my sister back. But I'd learned the old stories over the past 3 days. I understood the rules now. Nothing truly dead could be restored. Not really. Not in a way that mattered. What came back would wear Emily's face but wouldn't be her, would be a hollow thing, a mockery, a trap. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the tears running down my face. "Emily's dead. Her spirit has moved on. You can't give her back because you never had her, not really. You just took her body, her life, her moments. But her spirit, her essence, that was never yours to claim." The entity's eyeless face turned toward me with something like surprise. "You refuse the trade?" "I refuse the lie." I stepped forward, positioning myself between the entity and Maria, feeling the medicine bundle's warmth intensify. "But I will make a different offer, the old offer, the one my bloodline has the right to make." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your bloodline. You ran away for 8 years, denied everything you were, came back only for revenge. You're not a true boundary walker, Sarah. You're just a cop playing at traditions you don't understand." "Maybe," I agreed. "But my great-grandmother was a true boundary walker. My grandmother carried the gift even if she didn't fully use it. Emily was learning when you killed her. And I've spent the last 3 days with Hasti and Nez, learning what they knew, accepting what I am. So yes, Marcus, I have the right to speak the old words and make the ancient offers." I pulled out the corn pollen, let it sift through my fingers, drawing a line in the dirt between the entity and Maria. First offering, acknowledgement. I spoke in Navajo first, then English, the way Hasti Nez had taught me. "I see you. I know what you are. You are ancient, older than my people's presence in this land, older than the formations that watch us. You are not evil by nature, but by choice, not demon, but something that exists between worlds, that feeds on what it can take. I acknowledge your power, your age, your right to exist." The entity stilled, its attention fully focused on me now. The fire dimmed, as if even the flames were listening. Second offering, respect. I continued the ritual, speaking words that felt like they were coming from somewhere deeper than my conscious mind, drawn up from my bloodline, from generations of women who'd stood in similar places, making similar offers. You existed here before my people came from the north, before the Spanish came from the south, before the Americans claimed this land. You have ancient rights, old agreements, treaties made when the world was younger. I respect those rights. I respect what you are and what you were before these three corrupted you, before they bound you to their service and made you hunt for them. Angela hissed, a sound no human throat should make. We didn't corrupt it. We freed it. We gave it purpose, prey, power. Silence. The entity's voice was no longer Emily's, but something older, deeper, harmonics that made the building's frame creak and groan. The boundary walker speaks the old words. Let her speak. I pulled out the sacred ash, adding it to the corn pollen line, strengthening the barrier. Third offering, choice. My voice was stronger now, more confident, feeling the power of the ritual flowing through me. This child, Maria Begay, is under my protection, by blood, by duty, by choice. You cannot take her, not while I stand between you. But I understand the old laws require balance, require exchange, so I offer myself in trade. Sarah, no. Maria's voice, small and terrified. Not my death, I continued, but my blood, my power, my connection to this land, and my bloodline's accumulated strength. I offer it freely, in exchange for this child's life and your banishment from Highway 163. The road that has been your hunting ground for how many years? How many decades? How many centuries? I close it to you. I bind you from it. I reclaim it for human passage. The entity moved closer, stopping at the line of corn pollen and ash, unable or unwilling to cross. Your grandmother made a similar bargain in 1971, bound us from certain territories, closed certain hunting grounds. The price was high, but she paid it. Your mother was offered the same choice 20 years later and refused. She died for that refusal, taken on this very highway, crying for mercy we don't give. Your sister tried 3 months ago, but had insufficient knowledge, incomplete training. She offered herself, but didn't know the proper words, the right forms. So we took her offering, but gave nothing in return. It leaned down, bringing its eyeless face level with mine. But you, Sarah Nez, you understand balance. You know the old protocols. You speak with authority. So I ask you, do you understand the price? Do you know what you're offering? I pulled out my knife, a simple folding blade I'd carried since the police academy. I understand. Blood freely given, mixed with sacred ash, bound with the protection songs, sealed with the authority of my bloodline. I offer my power, my connection, my strength. Not my life, but my gift. After this, I'll still be able to see you and your kind, but I won't have the power to confront you again. This is the last time I can stand as a boundary walker. This is the final use of my inherited strength. And you make this trade willingly? For this child you don't even know? I make it willingly. Because this is what my bloodline does. We stand between your kind and ours. We make the hard choices. We pay the prices others can't or won't pay. I cut my palm, deep enough to bleed freely, held my hand over the ash pile, let the blood drip and mix with the sacred materials. Then I began to chant, the protection song Hastin Nez had taught me, the one that only those of my bloodline could sing with full power, words that made the air thick and the firelight strange. The entity screamed, a sound that shattered all the windows and sent Marcus, Angela, and Robert to their knees, clutching their heads. The debt is paid, I shouted over the chaos, my voice amplified by power I didn't fully understand, drawn from my bloodline, from my grandmother, from my great-grandmother, from women stretching back through centuries. You are banished from Highway 163. You are barred from the corridor between the Mittens and Mexican Hat. The hunting ground is closed. The old agreement is rewritten. Light exploded from the ash pile where my blood had fallen, blinding white tinged with gold, expanding in a sphere that engulfed the entire trading post. The entity screamed again, its form dissolving like smoke in wind, burning away in the light. Marcus, Angela, and Robert transformed back to human form, crying out in pain as whatever had changed them was ripped away, leaving them ordinary and mortal and terrified. I kept chanting, spreading more ash in a circle around Maria, protecting her from the backlash of power, keeping her safe while reality restructured itself around my bargain. The light grew brighter, hotter, burning away years of accumulated darkness, cleansing the trading post of every ritual performed here, every death, every corruption. And then suddenly, it was over. The light faded. The screaming stopped. I stood in the center of the room, my hand still bleeding. The medicine bundle around my neck crumbled to ash, my strength almost gone. Marcus, Angela, and Robert lay unconscious on the floor, breathing but clearly broken, whatever power they'd claimed now stripped away. The entity was gone. Not destroyed exactly, but banished, sent back to whatever place it had come from, barred from returning to this stretch of highway by the bargain I'd sealed with my blood and my bloodline's power. Dawn light was streaming through the broken windows. I hadn't realized how long the confrontation had lasted, but the sun was rising over Monument Valley, painting the formations in shades of red and gold. "Is it over?" Maria asked, her voice tiny. "It's over." I cut her bindings with my knife, helped her to her feet. "You're safe now. Let's get you home." I carried her out of the trading post, this small child who'd been through horror no one should experience, into the morning light and the clean desert air. In the distance, I could see vehicles approaching. James and Captain Sozi and probably half the Navajo Nation Police Department, coming to find me, to see if I'd survived. I'd survived, but I'd paid the price. I could feel the absence of power in my blood, the severing of the connection that had made me a boundary walker. I could still see the old things, would always be able to see them, but I could never confront them this way again. This had been my first and last use of my inherited strength. Emily had tried to make this same bargain and failed. My grandmother had succeeded and lived with the consequences. Now I joined that lineage, women who'd stood between worlds and paid the price to protect others. Maria wrapped her arms around my neck as I carried her toward the approaching vehicles. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." "That's what we do," I told her, echoing words I'd heard from Captain Sosi, from Hastin Nez, from my own bloodline speaking through memory. We protect people from things they don't believe in. We pay the prices others can't pay. We stand in the darkness so others can walk in the light. The sun was fully up now, Monument Valley revealed in all its ancient beauty, formations that had watched this drama play out thousands of times over millennia, indifferent and eternal and sacred. The entity was gone, banished by bargain. The three who'd served it were broken, their power stripped away, and I was changed, fundamentally and forever. No longer the cop who'd driven down from Denver 3 months ago, no longer the woman who'd rejected her heritage. I was Sarah Nez, the last daughter of a line of boundary walkers, and I'd just completed the purpose my bloodline had been preparing me for since birth. James reached me first, took Maria from my arms, wrapped me in a blanket someone handed him. "Sarah, are you hurt? There's blood." "I'm fine. It's over. They're inside, unconscious. The entity is gone, banished. Highway 163 is safe now." "The entity? You mean—" "It's gone, James. Sent back. The bargain is sealed." I showed him my cut palm, already starting to heal. The old way. The only way that works. He looked at me with understanding and something like grief. "You traded your power. I traded what I had to trade, and I'd do it again." I looked at Maria, safe now, traumatized but alive, being checked by paramedics who'd arrived with the convoy. She's alive because I made that choice. Emily would have made the same choice. My grandmother did make the same choice. This is what our bloodline does. Captain Sosi approached, his expression solemn. "The 3 suspects?" "Inside. Human now. Mortal. Whatever made them powerful is gone. You can arrest them, process them, try them for murder under normal law. They're just people now. Broken, scared people who made terrible choices and paid terrible prices." And they were. When officers brought Marcus, Angela, and Robert out in handcuffs, they looked ordinary, middle-aged, frightened, diminished. The transformation was complete. They'd traded their humanity for power, and now both were gone, leaving them with nothing but memory and guilt and the prospect of life in prison for the murders they'd committed. I watched them loaded into vehicles, these people who'd killed my sister and 7 others, who'd terrorized Monument Valley for years, who'd finally been stopped, not by modern law enforcement, but by ancient protocols and a bargain sealed in blood. The sun climbed higher, warming the desert, burning away the last traces of night, and I stood there in the morning light, changed but whole, diminished but purposeful, knowing exactly who I was and what I was meant to do with whatever years I had left. The highway was safe now. The ancient thing was banished. The hunters were caught, and I was finally home in a way I'd never been before, not running toward something or away from something, but standing exactly where I was meant to stand. A boundary walker who'd crossed her last boundary, paid her price, and survived to tell the tale. 3 months later, Monument Valley looked exactly the same as it had the day I'd arrived. The mittens rose against the endless blue sky, red rock formations stretched to the horizon. Highway 163 cut through the desert like a scar, but everything felt different now, calmer somehow, as if the land itself knew that an old threat had been removed, an ancient bargain had been fulfilled. Maria Begay was home with her family, physically recovered, though she still had nightmares. Her parents had brought her to the station twice to see me, to thank me, to let Maria know that the woman who'd saved her was real and not just a dream from that terrible night. The second time, Maria had given me a drawing she'd made, stick figures of me and her holding hands under a sun with protective symbols drawn in the corners. It hung on my desk now, reminder of why the protocols mattered, why the old knowledge was worth preserving. Marcus Totachin, Angela Yazzie, and Robert Blackhorse never made it to trial. They were found dead in their holding cells 3 days after the trading post confrontation, burned from the inside out, their bodies showing no external wounds, but completely consumed internally. The medical examiner ruled it unknown cause, possibly related to exposure to unknown chemical agent. But those of us who understood the old ways knew the truth. When the entity was banished, when its connection to this land was severed, it had taken back everything it had given them. The price of their power, paid in full. Highway 163 had been quiet since that night. No disappearances, no accidents with unknown animal causes, no reports of figures moving wrong between the formations. The corridor between the mittens and Mexican hat was safe again, protected by a bargain sealed in blood, watched over by protocols that were older than the road itself. Captain Sosi had promoted me 2 weeks after Maria's rescue. Cultural Liaison Officer, a position created specifically for me, bridging traditional knowledge and modern law enforcement. I spent half my time on regular patrol and the other half training other officers in the protocols, explaining not just what the rules were, but why they existed, the history behind each one, the lives saved and lost that had led to their creation. The framed protocols on the station wall had become required reading for every new officer. What had once been dismissed as superstition was now standard operating procedure, and the officers who followed them lived, while those who ignored them found themselves facing things their academy training had never prepared them for. Today was the recognition ceremony at the Tribal Council Chambers in Window Rock, 3 hours south of Monument Valley. Hastin Nez had traveled down for it, looking somehow both older and more vigorous, wearing full traditional dress and enough turquoise jewelry to open a small shop. He sat in the front row as the council formally recognized my actions, my sacrifice, my role in stopping the Highway 163 disappearances. Officer Sarah Nez, Council President Begay said, reading from a prepared statement, has demonstrated the highest commitment to protecting our people through both traditional knowledge and modern law enforcement. By honoring the old ways while serving in a contemporary role, she embodies the bridge between past and future that our nation needs. We recognize her sacrifice, her courage, and her dedication to keeping our people safe from threats, both seen and unseen. The applause was genuine and warm. James whistled from the back row until Captain Sosi elbowed him quiet, and Hastin Nez smiled with something like pride, or maybe satisfaction, the look of a teacher whose student had finally understood the lesson. After the ceremony, I drove to the cemetery outside Window Rock where Emily was buried. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the rows of headstones. Emily's grave was marked with a simple stone, her name and dates, and the words, "Beloved daughter, sister, and officer." I knelt in the red dust beside her grave, touching the cool stone, finally able to speak words I'd been carrying for 3 months. "I understand now," I said quietly, my voice rough with emotion I'd been holding back during the ceremony. "Why you came back to Monument Valley, why you investigated even when it was dangerous, even when it scared you. This is who we are, Emily. This is what our bloodline does. We stand between the darkness and the people who can't see it. We pay the prices others don't even know need paying." The wind picked up, carrying red dust across the cemetery in swirling patterns. For just a moment I felt something, not a presence exactly, but a sense of peace, of approval, of sisterly love that transcended death. Maybe it was just the wind in my imagination, grief and exhaustion creating meaning where none existed. Or maybe the boundary between living and dead was thin here too, and Emily could hear me, could know that her death hadn't been meaningless, that I'd finished what she'd started. "I'm sorry I wasn't here to help you," I continued, tears running freely now. "I'm sorry you had to face them alone, with incomplete knowledge, without backup. But I'm here now. I won't let anyone else die like you did. I promise you, Emily. The highway is safe. The protocols are being followed. And I'm not running anymore." I stayed there until full dark, talking to my sister, telling her about Maria's recovery, about the training program, about James's progress in learning the old ways. about Hastianez's patient teaching. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying since that phone call at 2:47 in the morning had finally been lifted. The drive back to Monument Valley took 3 hours through darkness, but it was a comfortable darkness now, familiar and safe. I pulled into the station parking lot at 10:15, planning to grab some files from my desk before heading home. James was still there, working late on paperwork, coffee mug beside his computer. He looked up as I entered, smiled tiredly. "How was the ceremony?" "Good. Hastianez said to tell you you're doing well with the protection songs. Said you've got a natural talent for the traditional ways." Coming from him, that's high praise. James gestured to his computer screen. "I've been reviewing the old case files, the ones from before the protocols were written. Sarah, the pattern goes back decades. Multiple entities, multiple hunting grounds, multiple bargains made by boundary walkers we've never heard of. Our people have been fighting this fight for generations." "I know, and we'll keep fighting it. That's what we do." The radio on James's desk crackled to life. "Any available units? We have a possible protocol violation near Goulding's Lodge. Caller reports hearing whistling from 3 different directions, approximately 2300 hours, requesting response." James and I locked eyes. Protocol 3. Whistling from multiple directions meant don't investigate, leave the area. But it also meant something was active, something was hunting, something needed to be documented and monitored. "You ready?" James asked, already standing, grabbing his keys and duty belt. I touched the new medicine bundle hanging around my neck, smaller than the one I'd sacrificed but still potent, assembled by Hastianez with materials gathered from my grandmother's old hooghan. I checked my pockets, confirming I had corn pollen and sacred ash, the physical tools that supplemented the knowledge I'd learned. I couldn't make another bargain, couldn't use my bloodline's power that way again, but I could still investigate, still document, still protect. "Let's go," I said. We drove north on Highway 163, the same road where Emily had died, where 7 others had disappeared, where I'd made my bargain and paid my price. But it felt different now, claimed and protected, watched over not just by protocols on a wall, but by people who understood them, who believed in them, who would follow them. The mittens appeared in our headlights, massive and eternal, and I felt no fear looking at them now, only respect and understanding. The ancient things were still out there, would always be out there, testing boundaries and seeking prey. But we were watching, prepared, armed with knowledge that went back centuries and commitment that would carry forward into the future. My name is Sarah Nez. I'm a Navajo tribal police officer in Monument Valley, cultural liaison officer for the Monument Valley District. I protect people from things they don't believe in. I enforce laws older than highways, boundaries deeper than jurisdictions, protocols that were written in blood and learned through loss. I walk between the world you see when you drive through Monument Valley and take photographs of the formations, and the world that exists in the spaces between those rocks, in the darkness of new moon nights, in the old places where things that predate humanity still remember when this land was theirs alone. I'm not a boundary walker anymore, not in the way my grandmother was, not with the power to make bargains and banish entities. That gift I used once and sacrificed to save a child's life. But I'm still a bridge between worlds, still someone who can see what others miss, still dedicated to keeping both my people and the old protocols alive. And I wouldn't have it any other way. There are rules here in Monument Valley, ancient rules that govern the interaction between human and other, between the world of daylight and the world of darkness. The protocols that hang on our station wall aren't suggestions or cultural artifacts or superstitious remnants of a less enlightened time. They're survival instructions, paid for with the lives of officers who learned too late that the old stories were true. They keep the ancient things away. They maintain the boundaries. They protect the unwary and guide the aware. Usually. But sometimes the boundaries are tested. Sometimes something crosses over, or someone crosses a line they shouldn't cross, or the balance shifts in ways that require intervention. And when that happens, when the radio crackles with reports of whistling from 3 directions or figures moving wrong or Highway 163 claiming another victim, James and I respond. We investigate. We document. We follow the protocols. And when necessary, we call Hasti and Nez, or the other medicine people who understand that law enforcement in Monument Valley requires both a badge and a medicine bundle, both a service weapon and sacred ash. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, formations rising like silent guardians on either side. Somewhere near Goulding's lodge, something was whistling, testing the boundaries, seeing what response it would provoke. We drove toward it without hesitation, 2 officers in a patrol vehicle, armed with both modern training and ancient knowledge, ready to face whatever waited in the darkness between the formations. Because this is what we do. This is who we are. This is the price we pay and the purpose we serve. And in Monument Valley, where the formations remember everything and the old things still walk in darkness, that purpose matters more than anything else. The protocols keep the ancient things away, usually. But when they don't, we're ready.